The first time I heard my aunt say the words, she did not even lower her voice. She was confused for weeks. Vivian said, smoothing the sleeve of her cream blazer as if she were flattening a wrinkle instead of rewriting a life. Let's not romanticize this. Eleanor knew what she wanted in the end. She said it in probate court, in a room that smelled like polished wood, old paper, and stale air conditioning. In a room where grief had already been translated into folders, signature, and exhibits. In a room where my future sat in a banker's box between her patent leather shoes and the leg of her chair. I remember staring at that box because it was easier than looking at her face. Inside it was the last month of my grandmother's life. Medication logs, hospice notes. A late codicil to her will sign 2 nights before she died. A copy of the deed to the small carriage house behind her property. Receipts from the pharmacy. Printed emails. 3 photographs. And 1 audio file no one but I knew existed yet. I was 32 years old that morning, wearing a charcoal dress I bought on clearance because I could not afford to look as worried as I felt. And I was terrified. Not because of the money. Although everyone assumes these stories are only about money. Money matters. Of course it does. Money pays tuition. Money pays mortgages. Money pays for the kind of future that lets you stop apologizing for surviving. But what sat in that box was bigger than money. If Vivian's version of the truth won, then the last 4 years of my life would be turned into a cautionary tale about naivete, about a foolish granddaughter who gave up a stable job, postponed graduate school, moved back into an old family home, changed bandages, organized pills, cleaned sheets, tracked blood pressure, handled insurance calls, and stayed awake through long nights because she believed love counted for something. If Vivian won, then all of that would become invisible. And if you have ever been made invisible by your own family, then you know that is the deepest theft. Before I tell you how that courtroom morning happened, like this video and subscribe. But only if this story resonates with you. Because some betrayals do not begin with a signature. They begin years earlier. In the way a family decides whose effort counts and whose sacrifice is simply expected. My name is Lena Whitmore, and my grandmother Eleanor saved me twice. The first time, she did it in public, where everyone could see. The second time, she did it after she was already dying. To explain the second one, I have to take you back to the first. I was 8 years old, the summer my father left. He did not slam the door. Men who want to preserve their own mythology rarely do. He stood in the front hall of our house in Savannah, with his keys in one hand and his travel mug in the other, and said he needed space, as though space were a noble thing, and not the coward's word for departure. My mother cried in the kitchen without making noise. I sat on the staircase landing in socks. Holding the railing so hard, my palm had little red marks in it for an hour afterward. And my grandmother Eleanor, my mother's mother, drove across town in a linen blouse and flat shoes, walked into that thick, stunned silence, and said, "Lena, pack a bag. You're coming home with me tonight." Not to punish anyone. Not to make a scene. Just to remove one frightened child from the center of emotional weather. That was Eleanor. She was not soft in the way people mean when they call a woman kind. She was precise. She believed in folded napkins, direct eye contact, and saying thank you to the person who handed you your change. She believed soup should simmer slowly, and bad manners should not gloat. She clipped articles she wanted me to read and underlined them in blue ink. She wrote dates on the back of photographs, She said memory mattered because memory was how people fought erasure. At 8, I did not understand that line. By 32, it had become the spine of my life. My grandmother lived in the old Whitmore house on Mercer Street, a broad 2-story place with pale shutters, a deep porch, and a brick path that curved toward a detached carriage house out back. The carriage house had once been servants' quarters generations before. By the time I knew it, it was mostly used for storage, though Eleanor kept threatening to restore it properly one day. One day, she would say, tapping her teacup with her spoon, "Someone in this family will appreciate structure." She always looked at me when she said it. I adored her. Not in the vague holiday card way people claim closeness with relatives they see 3 times a year. I mean, I knew where she kept the spare candles, how she liked peaches sliced, which floorboard near the butler's pantry clicked in damp weather, and the exact look she got on her face when she was trying not to laugh at someone rude. I was the child who stayed late after Thanksgiving to wash dishes with her, the teenager who helped catalog the old family photo boxes, the college student who called every Sunday, and that, according to certain members of my family, was my first offense. Vivian was my mother's younger sister, 15 years younger than Eleanor had been when she first had my mother, and 15 times more invested in being admired than being useful. She married well, then divorced expensively, then reinvented herself every few years with a new business venture and a new shade of blonde. She had opinions about skincare, market trends, and other women's mistakes. She wore white in rooms where other people were grieving and somehow made it look intentional. When I was growing up, she called me scholarly, in the tone some women use for poor thing. She had one son, Carter, who was 2 years older than me and had never in his life mistaken confidence for competence because no one had ever forced him to learn the difference. Carter bounced from real estate licensing to craft whiskey distribution to something involving luxury golf memberships. Every Thanksgiving he arrived with a louder watch and a shakier story. Vivian adored him. Eleanor did not trust him. She was always civil. That was her religion. But she once watched Carter pour bourbon into a crystal tumbler at noon and murmured to me, "That young man has the energy of a receipt with no itemized list." I laughed so hard, I nearly spilled gravy on the tablecloth. Still, families create fictions to preserve themselves. Ours was that Vivian was glamorous but harmless. Carter was unserious but lovable. I was reliable, which sounds like praise, until you realize reliability is often how families label the person they plan to use. By the time I was 27, I had built what looked from the outside like a sensible life. I worked in donor relations for a small arts foundation in Atlanta. I rented a compact apartment with unreliable heating and excellent light. I had a boyfriend named Andrew who was kind in the polished and temporary way. Some men are kind when they still believe a relationship should improve their schedule rather than deepen it. I was applying to graduate programs in nonprofit management because I thought structure plus meaning sounded like a life. Then my mother called on a Tuesday in October and said, "Your grandmother fell in the garden?" Nothing dramatic at first. A fractured hip. Surgery. Rehab. Recovery expected. Then not expected. Complications rarely announce themselves with the respect they deserve. They arrive disguised as setbacks. Fatigue. A small infection. Confusion after anesthesia that lingers longer than doctors like. A body that does not return to its previous arrangement just because everyone wishes it would. I started driving down every other weekend. Then, every weekend. Then, taking calls from rehab nurses during lunch breaks in parking garages. Then, sleeping with my phone on my pillow. Then, counting the hours of Interstate 75 by billboard. I still remember the smell of the rehab center. Lemon cleanser over old carpet and boiled vegetables. The television in the common room always too loud. A volunteer playing piano badly near the holidays. My grandmother trying to make jokes for my sake and tiring halfway through them. At Christmas, she held my wrist and said, very calmly, I do not want to become a project people manage badly. I said she would not. She looked at me over the top of her glasses. Then do not let your aunt near my paperwork. That was the first time she said it directly. I told myself she was exaggerating. Families do that too. They receive a warning in plain language and call it tension because admitting it is a warning would require action. My mother, Helen, was exhausted in the way quiet women become exhausted. She had spent years smoothing around other people's egos and had mistaken that skill for peacekeeping. She loved Eleanor. I do not doubt that. But she was also frightened by conflict, the way some people are frightened by blood. Mention Vivian, and she would start speaking in smaller sentences, as if fewer words might lower the emotional temperature of the room. Your aunt means well, she used to say. No one has ever said that sentence about a person who actually meant well. In February, Eleanor came home. She was weaker, slower, less able to hide when she was in pain, but her mind, most days, remained diamond sharp. She needed help with stairs, medications, meals, and eventually bathing. She hated every part of the dependence. Not because she was proud in a foolish way, because she had spent her life being the competent center of every room, and now she had to ask where the extra blankets were in her own house. I did what reliable daughters and granddaughters have done forever. I reorganized my life around necessity and called it temporary. I took unpaid leave, then extended it. Then Andrew sat across from me in an Atlanta wine bar with Edison bulbs and said, I just think you need to decide whether this caregiving thing is a season or your whole identity now. He said it gently. That was the worst part. There is a particular cruelty in men who outsource selfishness to tone. I stirred my pasta long after it had gone cold and asked him what exactly this caregiving thing was supposed to mean. He sighed. Lena, I'm saying your entire life can't revolve around your grandmother. But for a while, it had to. Because life is not a motivational poster, it is triage. I ended things with Andrew 2 weeks later, after he complained that I was impossible to plan around. He wanted certainty. Eleanor needed medication at 6. Blood pressure checks at 8. Help to the bathroom at midnight. And reassurance at 3 in the morning when old pain made her think she had forgotten something important. So yes, I became difficult to plan around. I moved back into the Mercer Street house in March. At first I told myself it would only be for 8 weeks. Then 12. Then until summer. By August, I had learned more than I ever wanted to know about hospice consultations, assurance exclusion, medication timing, and how loneliness can settle into a house even when it is full of furniture. My old bedroom still had the sloped ceiling and narrow closet I remembered from childhood sleepovers. The wallpaper had faded near the window where sun hit hardest in the afternoons. At night, I could hear the old pipes ticking inside the walls. The house had its own respiratory system. Groans, settles, night sounds, wind pressing branches against the porch screen, the hum of the refrigerator in the distance. Once you start caregiving, you learn the acoustics of threat. You learn which silence means sleep and which means something is wrong. Eleanor would not let me martyr myself theatrically. That was one of her best qualities. If you're going to help me, she said one afternoon while I sorted prescriptions into labeled trays. At least do it neatly. So we built systems. A whiteboard in the kitchen with appointments and dosages. A folder for legal paperwork. A notebook by her chair where I logged symptoms. Appetite. And pain levels. A second set of keys hidden in a brass planter. Names and numbers for her attorney. Doctor. Patel. The pharmacist. The housekeeper. And later, the hospice coordinator. And because Eleanor was Eleanor, a typed list labeled, "In case of other people's confusion." That list included where she kept the deed to the property, the location of her original will, the passcode to a fireproof document safe, and a note that read, "Vivian is not to remove papers from this house. If she insists, call Mr. Sloan." Mr. Sloan was her estate attorney. I wish I could tell you I followed that instruction aggressively from the beginning. I did not. I was still under the spell of family choreography. The old pattern where the difficult woman is indulged to keep peace and the reliable woman is expected to absorb the cost. Vivian began visiting more often, once doctors started using phrases like quality of life and comfort-centered care. Never for long. Always dressed too well for the practical tasks she was not going to do. She would arrive with peonies or expensive lotion or imported cookies no one asked for and sit at Eleanor's bedside talking in an unnaturally bright voice about next steps, about protecting assets, about making things easy. Easy for whom was never clarified. Carter came twice that spring and spent both visits looking around the property the way some men assess a parking space. Once I caught him in the carriage house taking measurements with his phone. "What are you doing?" I asked. He smiled without embarrassment. "Just curious what this would rent for if somebody fixed it up." Somebody. That language again. The magical passive voice of people already planning their theft. I told Eleanor. She went very still. Then she said, "Bring me the blue folder." Inside the blue folder was her original will. Signed 6 years earlier. Well before the fracture. Before the surgeries. Before the confusion medication sometimes caused during the worst pain weeks. It was detailed. Orderly. And unmistakably hers. Specific cash gifts to charity. A modest bequest to my mother. A separate amount to Vivian. Personal items listed with irritating precision. And the carriage house, along with a small education trust and renovation fund, left to me. Not enough to make me rich. Enough to change a future. Eleanor knew I had deferred graduate school. She knew I wanted eventually to build or direct preservation-based community programs. She also knew I had put my professional life on hold to care for her in ways no one else had. "This is not payment," she told me when she saw my face. "Do not insult us both by calling it that." I said I had not. "You were about to." She was right. "It is continuity," she said. "That little house out back is the only thing on this property no one has yet vulgarized. You understand places. You understand stewardship. And the education fund is because care should not cost you your whole future." I sat on the edge of her bed and cried quietly, because crying loudly would have felt performative in front of her. She squeezed my fingers and said, "Let this help you become more yourself. Not more grateful, just more yourself." Those were her words. I remember them exactly. That is one thing about being underestimated. People think you are emotional, and therefore imprecise. They think memory belongs to the powerful, because the powerful tell the story loudest. But memory belongs to whoever survives with attention. After that conversation, I became more protective of the paperwork. I checked the safe weekly. I scanned copies of documents to a secure folder. I made notes after attorney calls. Mr. Sloan confirmed that the will was valid, current, and already reflected Eleanor's wishes as discussed over the years. He told her gently that if she wanted to change anything substantial, he preferred to review capacity carefully, especially given recent medical fluctuations. Eleanor laughed. That is why I still pay you. She seemed reassured. So did I. And that was my second mistake. The first was believing family politeness restrained greed. The second was believing greed only moved when the victim appeared weak. In fact, greed moves fastest when it senses a closing window. By late September, Eleanor's health worsened sharply. She developed recurrent infections and began sleeping longer during the day. Some evenings, she was lucid enough to discuss newspaper editorials and ask me if the basil on the porch had been watered. Other times, medication blurred the edges of her thoughts. She still recognized everyone. She still knew what she wanted. But the body was failing. And with it came exhaustion that deepened by the week. Hospice started in October. If you have never had hospice in a family home, let me tell you what no brochure captures. It is both intimate and administrative, tender and clinical. There are pill organizers and absorbent pads and whispered jokes and forms to sign and skin cream and prayer cards and disposal gloves and casseroles on the counter, and a sense that time itself has changed texture. The house began to smell faintly of lavender lotion, paper tape, chicken broth, and the metallic edge of illness. Windows were cracked for air, even when the evenings cooled. Voices softened without anyone agreeing to it. Shoes became quieter on hardwood floors. And people started appearing more often once death became visible enough to organize themselves around. Vivian came 3 times in 1 week. Carter twice. My mother almost daily, though she often cried in the powder room and came back out with fresh lipstick, as if color itself could function as dignity. One of the hospice nurses assigned to Eleanor during that period was Marisol Vega. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes, a firm voice, and the efficient movements of someone who did not confuse sympathy with chaos. She noticed everything. The placement of medication bottles, the unopened mail stacked too neatly, the tension in the room when Vivian entered, the way Eleanor relaxed when certain people left. The first time Marisol met Vivian, she looked at me later in the kitchen and asked, carefully, "Is there anyone I should be aware of creating stress for the patient?" I pretended not to understand. She pretended to believe me. That is another thing professionals do when families are unstable. They wait for you to become honest. Around that time, Vivian shifted tactics. Up to then, she had played the polished daughter, concerned, involved, mildly inconvenienced, but noble about it. Then, once she realized Eleanor's original will was not going to magically favor her son through sheer force of expectation, she began introducing new language. Protection. Misunderstanding. Vulnerability. She would corner my mother in the hallway and say things like, "I just worry Lena has too much influence right now." Too much influence. As if changing wound dressings at 2 a.m. were a power grab. As if grocery receipts and pill refill calls were evidence of ambition. As if the daughter who came in high heels at noon for 43 minutes understood caregiving better than the woman washing sheets before sunrise. Carter got bolder too. He started asking vague questions about title transfer, property tax liabilities, and whether the carriage house was legally habitable as a rental unit. I told him none of that was his concern. He smiled and said, "Everything becomes everyone's concern when estates get messy. There are people who telegraph their intentions because they have never once had to pay a price for doing so." I started sleeping with the blue folder in the locked drawer beside my bed. Paranoid? Maybe. Correct? Absolutely. Then came the Wednesday night in November when I drove to the 24-hour pharmacy because the prescribed anti-nausea medication had been delayed and Eleanor could not keep water down. Marisol was not on shift that evening. Another nurse named Diane was scheduled to arrive after 7. My mother had promised to stay until I returned. I was gone 91 minutes. Yes. I know the exact number. The pharmacy line was long. Rain started halfway there. Traffic stalled near Victory Drive because of a minor accident. I picked up ginger ale, saltines, sterile gauze, and extra batteries because caregiving rewires your mind into contingency. When I got back, the porch light was on, and Vivian's Mercedes was in the driveway. That alone sent a cold line down my spine. She had not said she was coming. Inside, the house was too quiet. My mother met me in the front hall with that guilty, watery look I have since come to associate with women who know they made room for the wrong person. "Where's Diane?" I asked. "She got delayed?" My mother said. "Vivian came by?" Of course she did. I set the pharmacy bag on the entry table harder than I meant to and walked toward Eleanor's room. The door was partly closed. Voices inside. Vivian's low and urgent. A man's voice I did not recognize. Paper moving. And Eleanor saying, clearly enough that I stopped walking, "I'm tired." My chest went hot. I pushed the door open. Vivian was standing beside the bed in a pearl-colored blouse. One manicured hand resting on a legal pad, as though she belonged there. Next to her was a man in a gray suit with a leather portfolio balanced on his knee. Eleanor was propped against pillows. "Tu parles." Oxygen tubing in place. Her eyes glassy with exhaustion. "What is this?" I said. Vivian did not even flinch. "Lena, lower your voice. You're upsetting her." The fury that line can produce in a caregiving daughter or granddaughter is difficult to explain to people who have never seen opportunism dressed as concern. I stepped closer to the bed. "Grandma?" Her gaze found me. For 1 second it sharpened. Relief. Then fatigue swallowed it again. Vivian gave me the kind of smile women practice for fundraisers and hostile brunches. "We're just making sure Eleanor's affairs reflect her current reality." The man in gray stood halfway. "I'm Nathan Bell. I'm here as an independent witness and notary." I looked at him. "For what?" Vivian answered before he could. "For a codicil." The room changed temperature. Not literally. The heater still clicked. Rain still moved softly against the windows. But the moral temperature changed. You know the moment when a suspicion becomes an event? When the abstract thing you feared decides to stand up and introduce itself? That was the moment. I asked Eleanor, "Did you ask for this?" Vivian cut in. She did. "Earlier." "Grandma," I said again. Louder now. "Did you ask for this?" My mother appeared behind me, whispering, "Lena, please. Please." That word families use when they want the truthful woman to become convenient. Eleanor opened her mouth, then shut it. Her breathing sounded shallow. She looked from me to Vivian and back again. Nathan Bell said, with rehearsed neutrality. If there's disagreement, perhaps we should pause. Yes, I said immediately. You should leave. Vivian turned to him. Ignore her. She's emotional because she stands to benefit from the old document. There it was. The accusation she had been laying track for over months. Not devoted. Not exhausted. Not protective. Interested. Self-serving. Greedy. The oldest trick in inheritance warfare is simple. Let one woman do the labor, then accuse her of motive when the accounting begins. I felt my whole body go frighteningly still. Nathan, I said, because I wanted him to hear how calm I could be. My grandmother has an existing attorney. This should not be happening without him. Vivian sighed dramatically. Mr. Sloane drags everything out. Mother wanted something simple. Eleanor's fingers moved weakly on the blanket. I went to her side and took her hand. Her skin felt papery and warm. She looked at me with an expression I still struggle to describe because it held too many things at once. Fatigue, shame, fear, and underneath all of it, effort. She was trying. Lena, she whispered. Just my name. Nothing else. But I knew her. She did not speak my name that way when she was choosing freely. She spoke it that way when she wanted witness. I turned to my mother. Call Mr. Sloane, right now. Vivian snapped. Do not make this uglier than it already is. I laughed once. It sounded terrible. You brought a notary into a hospice bedroom. Nathan Bell gathered his portfolio. I think I should step out. Yes, I said. But Vivian moved in fast, blocking his retreat with sheer social force. Mother, all this does is clarify things. You told me you didn't want Lena burdened by property upkeep. You said Carter has the business mind to handle investment decisions. That sentence was so obscene I almost missed the strategy inside it. Not theft. Protection. Not disinheritance. Burden reduction. Not greed. Business mind. People like Vivian never call destruction by its own name. Eleanor closed her eyes. And then, very faintly, she said, Not tonight. I heard it. I heard it. So did Nathan Bell, judging by the way his face changed. Vivian, however, pounced in the other direction. She's exhausted. Fine. We can finish quickly. Finish. As if Eleanor had agreed. As if fatigue were consent. As if dying women existed to be managed into signatures. I stepped between Vivian and the bed. No, I said. Everybody out. That was when Diane, the delayed nurse, finally arrived. She took one look into the room, saw the suited stranger, the papers, my grandmother's condition, and Vivian's face, and became instantly professional in the way only seasoned nurses can. I need everyone except immediate caregiver and patient to step out while I assess her, she said. Vivian bristled. We're in the middle of something. Diane did not even turn her head. Not anymore. For one beautiful second, I could have hugged her. Nathan Bell left first. My mother backed out in tears. Vivian lingered just long enough to lean close to my ear and say, very softly, if you were smart, you'd stop pretending this was ever going to be yours. Then she walked out, I did not answer because I was afraid if I did, I would say something that required a witness statement later. Diane checked vitals, adjusted the oxygen, reviewed medications, and asked enough pointed questions to make it clear she knew what had happened without me having to narrate it. She documented the event in her visit notes. I know that now. At the time, I only knew she wrote longer than usual. After she left, Eleanor slept for nearly 3 hours. I sat beside her in the yellow pool of lamplight while rain moved over the windows, and the grandfather clock in the hallway marked each quarter hour like a warning. Around midnight, she woke and asked for water. Then she looked at me and said, very clearly, "Blue folder." I retrieved it from my room and brought it to her bed. Her hand trembled as she touched the cover. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Sloan and Marisol." "Okay," I said. Her eyes closed again, then opened. "Do not let them make me sound foolish." The sentence cracked something inside me. "Never," I said. I believed I still had time. That was the lie. Grief tells you before it becomes grief. Because tomorrow did come, just not in the order I needed. The next morning smelled like coffee, gone cold and antiseptic. I had not slept more than 40 minutes in total. Every time the house settled, I woke. Every time Eleanor coughed, I was on my feet. By sunrise, my nerves felt flayed raw. But raw nerves are still nerves. They still work. They still warn you when something is wrong. And everything was wrong. Eleanor was awake just after 7. Though awake was becoming a fragile word by then. Her eyes focused. Her mouth formed thoughts, but every sentence seemed to cost her breath. She could not afford to spend. I held a straw to her lips, while pale winter light pushed through the curtains and turned the room silver. "Mr. Sloan," I said softly. "I'm calling him now." She gave a barely visible nod. So I stepped into the hallway, closed the bedroom door behind me, and called his office from the kitchen. Voicemail. I called again and marked it urgent. Then his assistant. Then his cell, which Eleanor had once given me for emergency use only. Which means exactly that. Lena. Not your generation's version of urgency. No answer. I left messages on all 3 lines with the same words. "This is Lena Whitmore. Eleanor Whitmore requested immediate contact this morning regarding her will. Someone attempted to bring in an outside notary last night. Please call me back as soon as possible." When I hung up, my hand was shaking. My mother sat at the kitchen table, twisting a paper napkin into threads. "I shouldn't have let her in," she said. It was the first honest thing she had said about Vivian in months. "No," I replied. She flinched. But I could not soften it. We were beyond the stage where comfort helped. Once a family crisis crosses into legal territory, euphemism becomes a weapon. "She told me Mother had asked?" My mother said. She said it would only be a conversation. "Vivian lies in complete sentences." I said, "You know that." My mother's eyes filled, but she nodded. There are moments when adult daughters stop speaking to their mothers as daughters and start speaking to them as fellow women, living inside the cost of other people's choices. That morning was one of them. At 9:15, Marisol came on shift. She entered with her usual steady energy. Dark hair pinned back. Badge clipped neatly to her scrub top. Her expression calm until she looked at my face. "What happened?" she asked. I told her. All of it. The notary. The papers. Vivian's language. Eleanor saying not tonight. Diane's intervention. Marisol listened without interrupting. Then looked toward Eleanor's room and said, I'm going to assess her first. After that, I need to document your account of last night and speak with Diane. That sentence did something important. It moved what had happened out of the realm of family drama and into the realm of record. Greedy people survive by making events sound emotional. Truth survives by becoming documentation. Marisol spent 20 minutes in Eleanor's room. When she came back out, her mouth had hardened in a way I had not seen before. She's lucid in flashes, she said carefully, but very fatigued. If she has legal wishes, she wants reaffirmed. This needs to happen properly and quickly. I know. Do you trust her current attorney? Yes. Then keep calling. So I did. At 10:12. Mr. Sloane called back. He had been in a deposition. He listened without interrupting. And by the time I finished, his voice had lost all softness. Do not allow any outside documents to be signed. He said, I'm on my way. I almost cried from relief. He arrived just after 11 in a navy overcoat, carrying a worn leather briefcase and the expression of a man who had spent 40 years watching families become themselves around estates. He had known Eleanor since before I was born. He also knew Vivian well enough to dislike her professionally, which, in someone as restrained as Mr. Sloane, was the moral equivalent of open warfare. He spoke to Eleanor alone first, with Marisol present as witness. Then he asked me and my mother a series of questions in the dining room while making notes in sharp, precise strokes. Had there been pressure? Yes. Had Eleanor requested a change to her will through him at any point in recent months? No. Did she seem frightened last night? Yes. Did she recognize the notary? No. Did I know his name? Yes. Nathan Bell. Had anything been signed in my presence? Not that I saw. Mr. Sloane closed his notebook. Good, he said. Good. It was such a strange word for the moment that I stared at him. He clarified. Good that she did not sign. Good that there is a witness. Good that Diane intervened. Bad that this happened. Very bad. But manageable. Manageable. Another important word. Increases. The right professionals do not promise justice. They promise process. And process, if you are lucky and prepared, is how justice arrives wearing sensible shoes. Mr. Sloane went back into Eleanor's room with a fresh copy of the existing will. His notes. And a one-page statement confirming that she wished no changes to be made and that any attempt to alter her estate documents outside his oversight would be unauthorized. Marisol remained with them. When they emerged, he looked grim but satisfied. She was clear, he said, exhausted. But clear. I have what I need. He instructed me to make copies. One for him, one for the file safe, one to be scanned, one for the hospice file if necessary. He also told me to write down everything I remembered about the prior evening while it was still fresh. So I did. The rain had stopped by then. Sunlight hit the windows with that harsh winter brightness that makes dust look accusatory. I sat at the desk in the library and wrote down times. Phrase. Positions in the room. Even what Vivian had been wearing. Pearl blouse. Gold watch. Legal pad cream-colored. Nathan Bell gray suit. My mother near the door. Eleanor saying not tonight. Memory belongs to whoever survives with attention. I wrote for 23 minutes without stopping. Then Vivian called. I watched her name light up my phone and felt something inside me flatten into calm. Not peace. Calculation. I let it go to voicemail. She left one message. Lena, I think we both know you're making this uglier than it needs to be. Mother was trying to correct something she hadn't fully understood before. You've been very isolated with her. And frankly, that creates influence. Call me back before you force this into something public. That was Vivian's genius. If you can call poison a genius. She never threatened directly when implication would do more damage. You've been isolated with her. Creates influence. Before you force this into something public. Translation. Stop resisting before I accuse you first. I saved the voicemail. Then I emailed the audio file to myself, to an encrypted folder, and to an account. Mr. Sloane's office used for evidence intake. Because even then, even before the worst of it, I had learned this. Never keep a family war on one device. That afternoon, Eleanor slept deeply, breathing shallower, hence cooler. The hospice equipment seemed louder somehow. Though maybe that was just my own dread echoing through the room. My mother went home to shower and returned with soup. None of us ate. Marisol adjusted medications, spoke gently to Eleanor, and checked on me in the kitchen with the quiet practicality of someone who knew family systems could rupture completely in the final 48 hours. At 6:40 that evening, Vivian arrived again. Mr. Sloane was gone by then. Marisol was still there. That mattered. Vivian did not enter like a guilty person. Guilty people often avoid the spotlight. Vivian preferred to overpower it. She swept into the front hall in camel wool and perfume that smelled expensive and hostile. I'm here to see my mother, she announced. Marisol stepped into the hallway before I could. She can have a short visit if the patient is not distressed, she said. Vivian smiled. The smile rich women use on service workers they have misjudged. Thank you. Family time is important. Marisol held the smile for exactly 1 second too long. Patient stability is important, she replied. I nearly loved her then. Vivian went into Eleanor's room for 11 minutes. I know because I timed it from the kitchen where I stood, gripping the marble counter so hard my fingers hurt. When she came out, her expression had changed. Sharper, less smug, as if whatever she had hoped to extract had not materialized. She's sleeping, Vivian said. Good, I answered. She lingered near the front door. There are easier ways to handle this, she said. Then you should have chosen one. Her eyes narrowed. You think devotion makes you entitled? I looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time in my life, I understood something that should have been obvious much earlier. She did not hate me because I wanted money. She hated me because I had been loved in a way she could not control. That carriage house, the education fund, the trust. None of it offended her on financial grounds alone. What offended her was what the bequest represented. Eleanor had seen me, chosen me, trusted me with continuity. And Vivian, who believed affection should either flatter her or serve her, could not tolerate that. You don't understand the difference between entitlement and stewardship? I said quietly. She laughed once. You really do think you're better than all of us? No, I said, just more honest. Her face changed. It is a dangerous thing. Telling the truth to a liar in a calm voice. Calm suggests evidence. She left without saying goodbye. Eleanor died the next night at 2:14 a.m. I was holding her hand. My mother was on the other side of the bed, weeping in those small broken gasps. I will hear for the rest of my life. Marisol had stepped out only moments earlier to update the chart and came back in when the pattern of Eleanor's breathing changed. The room was dark, except for the bedside lamp and the pulse oximeter glow. Somewhere in the house, an old floorboard settled. Outside, branches moved softly against the windows. There is nothing cinematic about a good death. There is no swelling music, no perfect final speech. There is stillness. Breath. Pause. Breath. And then a room full of people realizing they are already standing on the other side of a life. Afterward, Marisol turned off the monitor sound, checked the time, and gave us the kind of privacy that feels like an act of mercy. I laid my forehead against Eleanor's hand and cried, with the total lack of elegance grief eventually enforces. By morning, the house no longer felt like a house. It felt like evidence. Casseroles appeared. Hydrangeas. 3 neighbors. A pastor. 2 of Carter's useless floral arrangements. Vivian arrived in black cashmere and pearls. Hugged my mother for exactly the right length of time. And did not look at me until she had made sure other people were watching. Funerals are performance spaces for people like her. The service itself passed in a blur of tissue. Verse. And sunlight hitting stained glass hard enough to make dust look holy. I delivered the reading because Eleanor had once told me my voice knows how to carry meaning without begging for it. Carter nearly missed the church entirely and showed up smelling faintly of cologne and stale whiskey. Vivian cried at all the public moments and none of the private ones. Mr. Sloane delayed the formal family reading of the will until the week after the burial. That was strategic. He wanted papers filed, witness statements organized, records secure, and perhaps most importantly, he wanted Vivian to show her hand before he showed his laughing. She did. 2 days before the reading, I was served with a notice. Not a lawsuit yet. A challenge. Vivian alleged undue influence. She claimed I had isolated Eleanor during her illness, controlled access, manipulated medication timing, and exploited a vulnerable patient to secure favorable treatment in the existing will. I stood in the front hall holding those papers and felt no shock at all. Only confirmation. The cruelty of certain people is never surprising once you stop confusing it for instability. My mother was horrified. I didn't think she'd go this far, she whispered. I did. I had expected exactly this. Because greedy people cannot leave cleanly. If they fail to steal the gift, they try to stain the recipient. Mr. Sloane responded the same afternoon. He sounded almost cheerful. Good, he said. That word again. She's committed to a theory now. That makes her predictable. He asked me to come to his office the next morning with all logs. Notes. Copier document. Voicemail records. Care schedules. And any communication from Vivian or Carter over the previous year. I brought everything. Binders. Flash drives. Scanned folders. Color-coded medication charts. Printed texts. Voicemails transcribed. If there is a hidden advantage to being the reliable woman in the family, it is this. You know where everything is? Mr. Sloane's office occupied the second floor of an old brick building downtown with creaking stairs and brass door plates. His conference room smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. He reviewed my materials for nearly 2 hours without wasting a sentence. Finally, he removed his glasses and said, "You have something most undue influence claims do not survive." "What?" "Records." Then he leaned back. "And possibly a second thing. Tell me more about the nurses." I told him about Diane's intervention and Marisol's observations. He made notes and asked for full names. Then he asked a question that changed everything. Did anyone overhear Vivian when she believed family loyalty would keep the room closed? I hesitated. Not that I know of. At the time, that was true. At the time, I still thought the winning evidence would be the hospice notes. The attorney statement, Eleanor's reaffirmation, the voicemail, my logs, and the visible absurdity of Vivian's timing. I did not yet know about the recording. That came 4 days later. The preliminary probate meeting was held in a private hearing room rather than a dramatic courtroom. But private rooms can hold public humiliation just fine. Vivian arrived with an attorney named Douglas Pierce. A sleek man whose cufflinks probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget at the time. Carter sat beside her, looking bored and injured at once. Like a man forced to attend consequences in an uncomfortable chair. Vivian's strategy was simple. She wanted to make me look grasping, suspiciously organized, emotionally fused to Eleanor, financially motivated. She used my sacrifice as evidence of ambition. Every ride to a specialist, every prescription refill, every overnight stay, every legal note, every scanned document. She repackaged care as control. It was almost elegant in a monstrous way. If you have never seen love weaponized against the person who performed it, count yourself lucky. Mr. Sloane countered methodically. Existing estate plan predating illness. Long-standing attorney oversight. Reaffirmation statement. Witnessed concern regarding attempted outside notary involvement. Hospice records. Care records. Voicemail from Vivian, implying urgency and pressure. At one point, Douglas Pierce suggested that I had manipulated Eleanor by making myself indispensable. That phrase nearly made me laugh. As if elderly women with sharp minds accidentally forget which relatives arrived only when property entered the conversation. Then Vivian made a mistake. Actually, she made two. The first was vanity. The second was underestimating people she considered invisible. When questioned about the evening, she brought Nathan Bell into the house. She claimed Eleanor had been fully oriented, calm, and eager to fix prior misunderstandings. She said the nurse on duty had not objected. She said I had burst in hysterically and frightened a vulnerable dying woman into abandoning her wishes. I was furious. But fury is useless unless you can convert it. Mr. Sloane only nodded and said, "Thank you. We may return to that." Return to that. Another beautiful legal phrase. It means I heard your lie, and I'm giving it room to grow legs before I cut them off. The meeting adjourned without resolution. But Mr. Sloane seemed less concerned afterward than I expected. Something in her timeline doesn't fit, he said while we stood in the corridor outside. What? She's too specific where she should be cautious. That usually means she thinks a witness supports her. Nathan Bell. I thought, maybe. But Mr. Sloane was looking at his notes in a different way, as though a pattern had just shifted under his hands. That evening, Marisol called me from a number I did not recognize. I was in the Mercer Street kitchen, packing donation boxes of unused medical supplies, because the practical work after death never waits for the emotional work. The sun had gone down. The house smelled like cardboard, candle wax, and flowers already beginning to turn. "Lena," she said, "I need to tell you something." Her voice was careful. The careful voice of professionals deciding whether crossing into truth will cost them. I set the tape gun down. "What is it?" "The night before your grandmother died," she said. "I finished charting late. After my shift ended, I came back inside because I realized I'd left my personal recorder in the side pocket of my bag in the sitting room." I frowned. "Your recorder?" "I use it to dictate end-of-shift notes, to transcribe later. Personal habit. Not official documentation." Something in my spine went cold. I walked in through the side entrance. She continued. "I heard voices in the sitting room off the hall. Your aunt and the man she brought." I did not speak. "I don't think they knew I was there," she said. My recorder had been left on. For one full second, I forgot how to breathe. "She admitted it?" I whispered. "Not in those words." Marisol said, "But enough. More than enough." I sat down hard at the kitchen table. There are moments when hope does not feel uplifting. It feels surgical, painful, sharp. "Do you still have it?" "Yes." I closed my eyes. In the silence that followed, I could hear the old refrigerator hum and a car passing slowly outside and my own pulse slamming against the inside of my wrist. "What exactly is on it?" I asked. Marisol took a breath. "Your aunt said the old woman was fading too fast, and that if Carter didn't get the carriage house now, it would be lost to that sanctimonious little caretaker." The man asked whether Eleanor understood the changes. And Vivian said understanding was flexible if the signature was in place before morning. Then she said, "And I wrote it down when I listened back. By the time anyone challenges it, grief will do half the work for us." I put my hand over my mouth, because there it was. Not suspicion. Not tone. Not implication. Intent. Clean. Ugly. Undeniable intent. Marisol continued before I could speak. "I didn't come forward immediately because I was unsure about the recorder. Confidentiality. And whether it would create more harm. But after hearing, there was now a formal challenge against you. I contacted my supervisor and then sought legal guidance. I was told the recording may be admissible depending on state rules and circumstances. But at minimum, it supports my statement." Supports my statement. Even then, she was being careful. Professionals like Marisol do not dramatize. They fortify. "Would you be willing to tell Mr. Sloan?" I asked. "Yes." I started crying then. Not delicate tears. Not cinematic tears. The kind that come when your body realizes it has been carrying defensive tension for too many consecutive days and can finally put some of it down. "I'm sorry." I said, "Don't apologize." Marisol answered, "Your grandmother knew who was caring for her." That sentence saved something in me long before the legal outcome did. The next 48 hours moved fast. Mr. Sloan obtained Marisol's written statement. A chain of custody memo for the recording. Diane's notes from the initial attempted signing. And supplemental hospice documentation about Eleanor's fatigue and condition. He also subpoenaed Nathan Bell's appointment records. Nathan, faced with the possibility of being professionally attached to a manipulated deathbed signing, suddenly developed a conscience. Amazing how often that happens when liability enters the room. His revised statement was careful, but useful. He admitted he had not independently assessed Eleanor's capacity before entering. He admitted she appeared tired and reluctant. He admitted, she said, not tonight. He admitted Vivian had represented the change as urgent and family approved. Urgent. Family approved. Those two phrases would matter later. The formal probate hearing was scheduled 3 weeks after Eleanor's burial. By then, the city had moved into that bright, brittle stage of winter, where the air feels scrubbed clean, and every bare branch looks like handwriting against the sky. I wore the same charcoal dress from the first appearance because buying a new one for battle felt indulgent. Mr. Sloane called it a serious dress for serious facts, which was as close to fashion commentary as he would ever get. Vivian arrived immaculate. Of course she did. Cream suit this time, soft gold earrings, a face composed into solemn injury, Carter beside her in a navy blazer, checking his phone until Douglas Pierce hissed at him to stop. When the hearing began, Douglas led with the same theory. I had inserted myself too deeply. I had benefited materially. I had controlled access. I had exploited intimacy. Mr. Sloane let him finish. Then he stood. There are men who command rooms through volume. Mr. Sloane commanded them through precision. He moved one document at a time. Each laid down like a stepping stone across a river. Someone else had mistaken for chaos. Existing will. Executed years before illness. Attorney testimony regarding long-standing wishes. Written reaffirmation signed under proper witness conditions the morning after the attempted intrusion. Hospice condition notes. Diane's statement. My care logs. Vivian's voicemail. Nathan Bell's revised testimony. And then, finally, Marisol Vega. She testified calmly. About Eleanor's condition. About family tension. About the attempted signing environment. About recovering her recorder. About what she heard. Douglas objected to portions of the recording's use. The judge allowed enough of it in for context and credibility. With accompanying testimony. That was all Mr. Sloane needed. The audio was played breakly, prosen, and 70. Not loudly. Not theatrically. Just enough for the room to hear Vivian's real voice when she thought no one important was listening. Fading too fast. That sanctimonious little caretaker. Understanding was flexible. Grief will do half the work for us. I will never forget the silence after it ended. There are silences full of uncertainty. This was not one of them. This was the silence that follows exposure. Vivian's face did something remarkable. Not guilt. Women like her almost never look guilty first. She looked insulted. Insulted that the invisible people had become material. A nurse. A recorder. Notes. Timelines. The kinds of ordinary things she had spent her life stepping around now standing up in public. Carter muttered something under his breath. Douglas Pierce closed his folder. The judge asked Vivian directly whether she disputed making the statements. Vivian tried the last refuge of people cornered by their own mouths. Context. It sounds terrible out of context, she said. Mr. Sloane did not even wait. What context? He asked. Improves understanding was flexible if the signature was in place before morning? No one answered. That was the moment. The macro peak. Not loud. Not cinematic. Just final. The judge found the attempted codicil invalid, rejected the undue influence challenge against me, and referred concerns regarding coercive conduct and witness handling for possible additional review. The original will stood. Just like that. Except, of course, it was never just like that. Justice sounds clean when summarized. In the body, it lands monsieur. My knees went weak so fast, I had to grip the table edge. My mother started crying immediately. Mr. Sloane touched my elbow once. Lightly. Then withdrew because he understood some victories need room before they become feeling. Vivian rose too quickly and knocked her chair back. For one desperate second, I thought she might still try to perform dignity. Instead, she turned to me and hissed, "Enjoy your little house." Little house. As if reduction could still wound me. I looked at her and realized something liberating. She would never understand what she had lost, because she had never wanted the right thing. She wanted possession. I wanted continuity. She wanted leverage. I wanted a future. So I answered in the calmest voice I had used all year. I intend to... The aftermath was uglier in practical ways and quieter in emotional ones. Vivian appealed nothing. I suspect Douglas advised her not to compound the damage. Nathan Bell disappeared from our orbit entirely. Carter tried. Briefly. To contact me through a falsely cheerful text, saying there had been bad blood all around, and maybe we could reset as family. Family. People love that word most when they want access without accountability. I did not respond. My mother spent months in a fog of shame and relief. For a long time, every conversation between us carried the weight of what she had failed to stop. But shame, unlike vanity, can sometimes evolve into honesty. Over time, she began naming things she had excused for decades. Vivian's manipulation, her own avoidance, the habit of sacrificing clarity to keep peace. Peacekeeping, I learned, is often just delayed. Surrender dressed as maturity. It took my mother and me a long time to rebuild trust. But we did. Slowly. Not through declarations. Through changed behavior, which is the only kind of apology I respect now. And the carriage house? It was in terrible condition. Of course it was. Leaning shelves, bad insulation, rot around one back window, dust thick as felt over the old trunks Eleanor had stored there. But the bones were sound. And Eleanor had been right about that. The place had not yet been vulgarized. The education trust, though modest, was enough to let me return to school the following year without drowning in debt. The renovation fund covered the essential repairs. I took classes in preservation planning and community development. Then more classes. Then contract work. Then eventually I built the career I had almost lost while caregiving. Not overnight. Nothing true happens overnight. But steadily. That little house out back became my first office. Then, later, my first home after the renovation was complete. I kept the original brick where I could. Restored the windows instead of replacing them. Painted the trim, the same pale cream Eleanor used to insist was civilized without showing off. I framed her blue ink notes and hung one above the desk. Memory matters, because memory is how people fight erasure. Every morning for the first year I lived there, I read that sentence before I opened my laptop. You might be wondering whether I ever forgave Vivian. No, and I am not ashamed of that. Forgiveness is too often demanded from the person who endured the harm, so the person who caused it can recover their self-image. I had no interest in repairing Vivian's self-image. She had spent enough of her life polishing it. What I chose instead was something harder and, in my opinion, holier. Boundary. Documented. Maintained. Unemotional boundary. I never took another call from her directly. Communication. When required. Went through attorneys or written channels. She was not invited into my home. Not the carriage house. Not any place built from Eleanor's faith in me. Carter drifted in and out of failed ventures, until even Vivian seemed too tired to keep translating his recklessness into promise. The wider family, predictably, split into camps. Some thought I had done the right thing. Some thought I should have kept it private. Private. That word again? As if secrecy is morally superior to evidence. As if truth becomes cruel the moment it is witnessed. What they really meant was this. They preferred the old family order, where women like Vivian could operate under the cover of tone, status, and social fatigue, where women like me did the work and stayed grateful, where nurses were background, where records were excessive, where intention could be denied if spoken in expensive enough rooms. I had no interest in preserving that order. A year after the hearing, I visited Marisol at the hospice office with a handwritten note and a lemon cake from the bakery Eleanor loved. She accepted both with embarrassment and grace. "You saved me," I told her. She shook her head. "No," she said. "Your grandmother did. I just refused to miss what I heard." That is the thing about salvation in real life. It rarely looks grand. Sometimes it looks like a woman who notices, a woman who writes things down, a woman who keeps the recorder running, a woman who decides that professional calm does not require moral blindness. As for Eleanor, I still dream of her sometimes. Not often now, but enough. Usually in the house, as it was before the hospital bed, before the oxygen tubing, before legal pads and probate notices. She is standing at the kitchen window in morning light, holding a teacup, commenting on something dryly devastating about politics or posture or badly folded linens. I am younger in the dream, and so is she. Nothing has been taken yet. I wake from those dreams grieving her all over again. But not only grieving, gratitude too. Because what she gave me in the end was not just property or tuition or a restored future. She gave me proof. Proof that love can be exact. Proof that attention matters. Proof that a life of quiet competence leaves a trail stronger than performance. And proof that when certain people try to rewrite reality, the answer is not louder, emotion. It is record. It is witness. It is timing. It is truth that knows how to wait. So if you are the reliable one in your family, the one they call capable when they mean convenient, listen to me. Write things down. Save the voicemail. Scan the document. Email the file. Do not confuse your reluctance for peace with other people's innocence. And do not ever let someone tell you that what you protected only matters if it was large enough to impress the wrong people. My aunt wanted the carriage house because she thought it was leverage. My grandmother left it to me because she knew it was a beginning. Those are not the same thing. They never were. And that night, in the hallway outside a dying woman's room, one nurse, with a recorder, made sure the difference would survive all of us. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to Revenge Story Vault. And if you've ever watched the wrong person mistake your care for weakness, leave a comment with the word enough. Because sometimes the end of the story is not revenge. Sometimes it is record. Sometimes it is boundary. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, it is a door someone tried to steal from you, becoming the exact door you walk through to begin again.